Welcome back, all of you, to the next important lesson. Before we get into the resources, I just wanted to pick up some questions which come to me in the last 2 decades from the architects, and especially in the last 5 years from people who have been architecting on the cloud and pretty confused on what's happening as a role of an AI, etc. Okay, let's jump into pick up. So these are some of the picks which I've done. If you have further questions, etc., please feel free to put it in the Q&A section in the course. We will come back and answer that. Okay, so let's look at some questions, and I will just get a bit hands-on into this so that all of you can also really look at it from a perspective about. So the first question, which is very common question which we get, is all about architect scenario for multi-cloud and integration. So I just have to tell you one very important piece that before we get started, multi-cloud is currently not an option for any one of us, right? So, because if you really understand what is multi-cloud, right? Because if you really look at the multi-cloud scenario today, like maybe you're using more than one cloud provider to really build your solution, right? For example, you can run your systems on AWS plus Azure or Google Cloud plus Oracle Cloud. So you customers generally don't want to get locked in with one provider. They want to pick the best service, for example, from each of the cloud, maybe AI from Google, compute from AWS. I'm just giving some examples. They want to increase reliability. Sometimes if one cloud fails, how the other one can pick up. Also, sometimes the regulatory or the data residency needs to run certain workload in specific regions, maybe even for the cost. There could be a lot of reasons, like you might go for multi-cloud. There's also reasons why companies avoid it. They have good relationship with the OEM. They don't want to get more complex. They harder to manage. They need more skilled teams because you need a multi-cloud. So single cloud is one provider. Multi-cloud is use multiple providers. Hybrid cloud is a mix of cloud plus on-premise, etc. Okay. Before we get there, why am I talking about this in detail? Because today the scenarios are all about multi-cloud, right? So we have hybrid cloud, we have multi-cloud scenarios where you have to get skilled today in multiple technologies. So if you can also take some examples here, like which I can take some examples just to give you before we get into looking at it from the architect perspective from let's take some examples like Netflix. I think all of you are familiar with Netflix. The main cloud it uses is AWS. AWS is its main cloud, but it uses Google Cloud for analytics and AI. So this is a very classic multi-cloud, different cloud for different strengths. Okay, and we don't get into apple to apple confusion or comparison or confusion in terms of what is good, etc. Snapchat, I think all of you are aware, runs the core infrastructure on the Google Cloud, but it uses AWS for the storage and even the global CDN, if I understand. They work together. You can keep going on. Like if you look at Boeing, it uses Azure for the enterprise workloads. It uses AWS for IoT and manufacturing system. Similarly, Spotify uses Google Cloud for data and AI. AWS for some certain services. A lot of banks, HDFC, JP Morgan, HSBC, store the sensitive data on AWS, Azure, sorry, and high performance system is trading system runs on AWS, the AI ML workload on Google Cloud. So a lot of examples here. What is very important is how does it change? So for me, if I am an architect who has to build an architecture on multi-cloud, so the first important things is to understand what are the cloud providers you're going to work. So in this course, we're covering AWS, and you might want to look at like you're extended to really use the Google AI ML or Azure's data. If that is the scenario, you might have to get into multiple cloud. Look at the architectural point from both these cloud providers and then create an integration points. So there is no one way to think this, but you will have to understand both the clouds, the level what is required for the project, and then architect it. One more point which I could really look at it is from one of the tools which becomes very important is the application integration tools. Because every time you're talking about integrating the cloud, you might think about creating something, for example, tools like AppFlow allows you to integrate SaaS provider. For example, if you're using an Oracle or a SAP or any of these things on the cloud, AppFlow can integrate apps and automate your data flows. Okay, the tools like EventBridge, the step functions, all these helps you to really build distributed applications. Now, as an architect, from a design perspective, integration becomes important because there are multiple cloud. And on the top of it, you have to notify, you have to queue, and you have to really look at managing your identity, which is like, how do I really look at creating an identity center so that people can log in into multiple places? Okay, that becomes important. So from the pillar perspective, if you really look at it from the course, you still continue doing the AWS elements from the AWS like 6 pillars. And wherever you're trying to think about integrating, now you must understand which is the primary cloud by looking at how many components. So that is, you have to use your common sense to really look at, okay, the majority of things which runs on this solution is from this particular cloud. Build a kind of a layering and then look at what are the additional things. Suppose you're connecting to the Google's Vertex AI or something like that, you should look at, have you optimized the Vertex AI for the AWS, something like that. You'll have to really create a common sense. Even the solutions which you can look at, like for example, if you just search for multi-cloud architecture, right? So you will not get these kind of elements generally from one single cloud providers. You will see that there are some best practices which are there on the multi-cloud architectures. You can also refer them a little bit. It is just beyond my scope to really cover all of them. To answer this question, the architect scenario will exist on multi-cloud. So you must have to really master your integration strategies here. You'll still continue using your 6 pillars. You'll still continue using your lenses, but predominantly you'll have to really look at it from a multi-cloud architecture. For example, if I go to the Google Cloud Architecture Center, right? Because here the page will be slightly different. So you have a Cloud Architecture Center similar to how AWS has given. So you have to go through this in case you're connecting it. Similarly, if you go into your Azure Cloud Architecture Center, right? So you'll see that. So one second. Okay, you will see that there is an architect center for cloud. So just get here. So you will see that these three, what we are talking about in the class about AWS cloud architecture, reference architecture. You find the similar thing in the Azure. You find similar thing in the cloud architecture. Each of the cloud provider, of course, their competitors, they're not going to really give you best practices directly in connecting. But if a customer insists, they will have their own patterns, best practices. Also look at like from an Oracle perspective, suppose you're more on the predominantly on the software side, you'll also have a lot of Oracle cloud architecture patterns. So there is an architecture center also on the cloud. So every vendor for that matter has an architectural principles. So when I tell like I'm teaching something for multi-cloud, I generally insist them like what you're doing there is nothing but like these things like which we spoke about, like what an architect should understand. They're defined with different parlance and names by the product management in different clouds. So, as an architect, you really don't much care about different things, but you should know the noun. It means you should know storage is important. How do you architect for a storage is a skill or an art or a science. Okay, when it comes to how do you architect an S3 bucket, how do you architect something from Azure storage, blob storage, and Google Cloud, that's a story which you will learn from an implementation perspective, which is also equally important. But if you really catch the blueprint, it becomes easy for you to implement the rest of the things. Similarly, for the security, so you should understand which is the hub, which is the connecting point all through your solutions, and then you can really look at the things. So that's a very simple answer to what we were talking about in terms of trying to tell you that this is the first question which I'm seeing very commonly asked. Let's go to the next one. The next question which we see is, do we need to use all pillars of our? This is a very, very common question. Imagine like when I was trying to take this lesson for you, I pretty complicated told you that AWS has got this well architected framework. Okay, and this well architected framework, let's go to the home page of the well architected framework. Give me a second. Okay, and when I go into the well architected framework, there are six pillars, right? Now, if you download 1,200 page of documentation, maybe 200 plus each, and you learn the lenses which we covered, right? And you don't know which lenses you'll use, so you'll have to really broadly go and learn. You'll end up that there are too many things to ask your customers. So do you have to ask everything? No. Sometimes even the reviews can be specifically for an escalation point that you're doing something for security with the CSO team. Sometimes you're doing an operation excellence review with the COO team. Sometimes you're doing with the core architect for the performance. So it really depends on the project. So have an open mind. Look at if it's a new project, you may want to run all the six pillars along with the lenses so that you're very clear that the project is well documented from a non-functional requirement. If you really see that specific pillar has got weakness, you can pick that pillar, review it for fullness, and nothing is perfect, right? So if you really see certain things have to be added, please go ahead and add more questions, more insights, more something personalized. And whenever it comes to integration, you have no choice. For example, if you are connecting to a third party applications, AWS is not going to take care of that particular application's performance or reliability, right? So they're going to stick to anything on the AWS. We're going to take care. Anything outside it, multi hybrid, they're going to not take ownership on it. This is where actual job of an architect comes. He has an overall thinking. For him, storage is a blueprint. It doesn't matter whether somebody is giving an S3 bucket or a blob storage from Azure or somebody giving a Google Cloud storage. For me, the storage concept doesn't change. Okay. Once you know that, then for a project, what is required is what I will put across. And these frameworks like well architected framework, design principles, and all this stuff is specific to an OEM. You have to know, for example, in my case, because I work with multi-cloud, I train people on a multi-cloud architecture. So I have to switch between them maybe every week. So for me, it doesn't matter. So you just have to really get used to the parlance, the syntax, the semantics of how a product management is put across these things. Once you know that, then it's all the same, right? And there can be some feature functionality which are better in one of the cloud provider. So instead of getting confused there, just focus on the customers. So customer has got an as-is architecture. Whatever works for him, whatever projects you're reviewing, based on that you can pay. So 58 questions which are there in the tool. No, yesterday we saw that there are 58 questions in the well architected tool. You don't have to run all the 58 questions. You can document like you don't require. It's better to document that I'm not going to use something. Okay, and similarly lenses, etc., etc. Hope I answered your questions. So it's a very, very interesting questions about what should I use all the pillars. Next very commonly asked question is, how does Gen AI impact the role of an architect? So the simple reason for asking this is because everything is getting automated, everything is getting autonomous, things are getting augmented with a lot of other things, right? That is an agentic concept which basically is trying to. So how does it impact an architect? It never impacts an architect, because the core knowledge will have to be anyway gained by you, right? Because imagine a system is learning based on the data it knows, right? And it keeps learning. Now it doesn't know the customer. No, you have to really understand the customer and probe. Maybe what you'll do is you'll make your systems very slavery type, where you're trying to think the customer. Okay, you don't waste time basically to really focus on drawing the diagram. So if some tools, an AI tool or Gen AI tool can generate a diagram for you, why waste time? So you just give the inputs. I want a diagram where the UX to this, to this, to this. It can generate something. It's good for you, right? So, but the inputs you're giving, and then when the diagram doesn't go, change it. So you need to have broad understanding. So to me, nothing changes. Go through the entire life cycle of learning as an architect. Okay, go deep dive, understand everything, and then don't do it. Okay, if the tools is automating, why you waste your time? You can focus more on value additions. So what can generate do? It can generate diagrams, it can give you insights, it can generate design codes, it can give you design suggestions. For example, if I use ChatGPT or OpenAI or Llama 3 or any of the AWS, Amazon Q, I can just go and ask questions to it. For example, if I have to design a data lake, I can go into a Amazon Q and tell, how do I design a data lake? What are the design principles of data lake? Give me some blueprint, give me some examples. Can you tell me which services are used to build a data lake? Okay, so I want to make a choice, design choice over which is better. Should I use an Apache Kafka or should I have to use this for streaming? Like that, I can keep interacting with Amazon Q because it's a smart fellow at the back end, but it doesn't know your project, right? So how can it replace? Because there are millions of projects which customer is going to give you in the future. So all these are fallacy, and let's not worry about after 20 years what happens. Anything can happen. Like today we are looking at multi-planetary kind of systems. So instead of getting confused, just focus that certain things will keep changing around you. You focus on your core skills, get certified, and on the top of it, be smarter to use these tools as ways to really automate and create autonomous. So that's the short answer for it. Can we create our own framework or approach architecture? This is very common. So if you, when I was working with a lot of partners, they all have an architect center of excellence. They have something like centers where they create something like a team which is thinking about the governance of the architectures, and they might be against when somebody tell use well architected framework tool, use Azure's architecture centers. You feel free to do anything you want, but when it comes to consistency, right? So when you're going across customers, customers are also educated from the OEMs. They might be telling them like we standardizing becomes very important for you. So if every partner throws something to the customer, it becomes difficult. So standardization, if there is a choice, please go for it. If you see that tool is not good enough, it is not giving you what you want, you go free to create your own framework and approach. And end of the day, you can just still put it on the marketplace so that it becomes very standardized for the world. So we're not against creating your own framework or approach. So when I worked with Microsoft, when I used to work with Amazon, when I used to work with Oracle, every time you get trained on certain frameworks, that doesn't mean you're getting subsumed or by what is being told there. You just keep your open networks and challenge those systems, right? Basically, what you need is to create customer excellence. For that, if there's a change required, it's okay. Not for the reason of you trying to show your skills with something new, right? Next question, what is the industry? So this is very important because a lot of people forget we are always thinking as an horizontal architect. There is also something like I'm just because we are in a class of AWS, I just want you to really think. When you go to the solution library, there is an industry element here. For every industry, there are some solutions which are being built, right? Now, this is also having an architectural angle. Now, this is a really, really important point because generally we think architecture is like nothing but service technology pieces. But if I just go into an aerospace and satellite industry, it might be talking about some of the companies which are trying to build something with AWS. And when you see those architecture, okay, what you will see is like they don't talk much technology. They will talk functional elements. For example, if I just pick something which is very easy and to understand, if I pick financial service, you will find you are talking about banking, capital market, insurance, and payments. And every time you are exploring a solutions on a banking, you will find that you will find some diagrams which have been created by a lot of companies and also with AWS giving you some solutioning. What is there in that architecture is nothing very, very focused for the domain specific thing. But end of the day, it will just get mapped to a service. So you will be talking an industry language, but finally it will be the same 230 plus services. But thinking it from the industry is a great way of trying to look at. Like you think about industry 4.0 in a manufacturing, a retail, you look at a fintech, all these are something very, very important. So it's all there here. We just covered it up a little bit. This is called very industry architectures. There are solution print blueprints for every industry available. You can backtrack that to a service or a technology. Similarly, there's something for cross industries, like same thing which can work across different industries. Technology is something which you have been covering from the for this class. Like you could really look at these technologies, and this is not only for AWS,